specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. All the powers of old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise this specter. Pope and Tsar, Metternich and Guizot, French radicals, and German police spies.
The fiddler saws the strings, his light brown hair he tosses in flames. He carries a saber at his side, he wears a pleated habit wide. Fiddler, why is that frantic sound? Why do you gaze so wildly around? Why leaps your blood like a surging sea? What drives your bow so desperately? Why do I fiddle while the wild waves roar, that they might pound the rocky shore? That I be blinded, that bosom swell, that soul's cry carry down to hell. Fiddler, with scorn you rend your heart, a radiant god lent you your art, to dazzle with waves of melody, to soar to the star dance in the sky. How so? I plunge without fail, my blood-black saber into your soul, that art god neither wants nor wists. It leaps to the brain from hell's black mists, till hearts bewitched, till senses reel. With Satan I have struck my deal. He chalks the signs, beats time for me. I play the death march fast and free. I must play dark, I must play light, till bowstrings break my heart outright. The fiddler saws the strings, his light brown hair he tosses in flings. He carries a saber at his side, he wears a pleated habit wide.
Der Abwähne und die Träger in den Krieg und vergeht der Abwähner, doch Abwähner, die man
Hello, comrades who have passed on, all those, the ether, cosmic ether, those in the great beyond. That's correct, you are listening to the Pioneers of American Socialism Halloween special. Welcome. And due to the fact that we are celebrating the old holiday, the proletarian holiday, that goes back to Samhain, the Druid festival, we are talking about socialism's intersection with spiritualism. And quickly, before we get to that, allow me to rationalize my introduction there. So the first part there was from the Communist Manifesto, right, where it talks about a specter haunting Europe. Always a classic ghost reference from the father of our tradition, Karl Marx. And then actually the second part was a poem entitled The Fiddler by Karl Marx, which may have inspired the German communist playwright Bertolt Brecht, who wrote the play Three Penny Opera, which you heard the song Mac the Knife from. That was Kurt Weill, his musical composer that worked with Bertolt Brecht, performing Mac the Knife from the Three Penny Opera. So what's the logic of celebrating Halloween and other proletarian holidays? Rosa Luxemburg says of May Day, which originally was a pagan holiday, and one of the 8 Sabbats, also known as Beltane, which was an ancient Celtic festival. So she says of May Day, the happy idea of using a proletarian holiday celebration as a means to attain the 8-hour day was first born in Australia. The workers there decided in 1856 to organize a day of complete stoppage, together with meetings and entertainment as a demonstration in favor of the 8-hour day. Now, at first, this celebration was April 21st in 1856, but then later in 1886, the Americans decided that May 1st should be the day of universal work stoppage, adopting the Celtic holiday of Beltane. Many American workers had roots in Ireland, Ireland being oppressed as they were by the British. So what are the origins of Halloween, or Samhain, which is how it's pronounced? It's spelled Samhain. Samhain, again, was a Celtic festival, Gaelic festival, like May Day, and it marked the end of the harvest season, the beginning of winter. According to Irish mythology, Samhain, like Beltane, aka May Day, was a time when the doorways to the other world opened, allowing supernatural beings and the souls of the dead to come into our world. So Beltane, a summer festival of living, Samhain was essentially a festival for the dead. So I propose that while we continue to celebrate May Day as a celebration of the rebirth of the workers' movement, the rebirth of organized labor, and the rebirth of workers' power in the springtime into the summer, we should celebrate Halloween for the giants on whose shoulders we stand. We haven't reinvented the wheel, and we should remember those who have passed on before us, many of them martyrs in the struggle, Che Guevara, Fred Hampton. So, spiritualism adopted Samhain as a holy holiday because it has the reputation of being a day when the veil between the physical world and the spirit world is the thinnest. And spiritualism, modern spiritualism, has its roots in Western New York. We'll get to that. This is Mitchell K. Jones from Rochester, New York, and we are talking about Footfalls on the Boundary to Another World on the Pioneers of American Socialism Halloween special. Thanks for listening.
Foxholes went to Hallow, Davis to heaven, for everywhere they tell of the secret world within his holy mountain time. Davis was transported to perform just in time to lead the kingdom of heaven to the unity sublime with heavenly creator and the spirit of time, burning over prairie, spanning distances. Magician was a traitor, mystery from Fred, farmer, tinker, tailor, boatman, baker, bread, commune in mountain heaven, the holy dance of dead. And here in New York's pasture, I lay my head to sleep, knowing no one ever dies in God's mystic deep. No one ever dies in God's mystic deep. No one ever dies in God's mystic deep. No one ever dies.
By the 1820s, the western frontier near Rochester, New York, was the epicenter of the Second Great Awakening. Itinerant Methodist minister Charles Finney, who came to Rochester in 1830 on a mission to save Rochesterian souls, was the standard bearer for the Second Great Awakening. Although his doctrine spoke to a broad range of trends in society to which people could relate, initially Finney's appeal was not necessarily theology. Finney refused a theological scholarship at Princeton in 1870 because he believed traditional clerical training was out of touch with the common people. He argued it rendered the preacher ineffective. Finney's style was unorthodox. He was direct, at times even confrontational. He addressed the audience as you rather than a more general pronoun. He used simple vernacular language and made frequent use of repetition. His sermons were never written down. He improvised based on the reactions of his audience. All these methods elicited an enthusiastic emotional response from those who came to listen. At the time, these methods were known as altruism. To 19th century onlookers, altruism was a system of actions, manners, and attitudes that fostered new and controversial religious doctrines. Altruism was exemplified in the new measures Finney employed at his services. So influential was Finney's altruism that it soon became the standard for new preachers. Essential to the new measures were new approaches to prayer. Prayer was social while at the same time personal. Men and women prayed in groups together. It was an offense against God to communicate with him in generalities. Each parishioner must make a prayer of faith, a specific request inspired by a desire to see the Lord glorified. Despite Finney's disdain for stuffy theology, perfectionism and millenarianism were key theological doctrines of the Second Great Awakening that directly influenced the emergence of utopian socialism. Christian perfectionism was the idea that humankind could achieve perfection on earth. Millenarianism was the belief that Jesus Christ would return to earth for a second time and he would rule for 1,000 years. Perfectionist millenarians argued true servants of God must create a paradise on earth to pave the way for the 1,000-year reign of Jesus the Lord. According to Albert Brisbane, the prophet of Fourierism to Western New York and the United States, socialism took hold in Western New York because it was the fulfillment of heaven on earth that the perfectionist preachers like Finney promised. Brisbane wrote, "It will no doubt be gratifying to those who take an interest in the great idea of social reform to learn that it is spreading very generally through the state of New York. The conviction that association will realize Christianity practically upon earth, which never can be done in the present system of society with its injustice, frauds, distrust, and the conflict and opposition of all interests, is taking hold of many minds and attracting them strongly to it." Brisbane saw the utility in appealing to the religious sentiments of Western New York's residents. He discovered Charles Fourier's ideas in 1830, the year before Finney's big revival. He adapted Fourier's theories to the sensibilities of an American audience, focusing mainly on his economic program and avoiding his liberty and sexual idea. He spoke to Americans about social problems that affected them, rather than risk upsetting those with conservative views towards religion and marriage. Although most Fouriers upheld the truth of the teachings of Jesus Christ, they distrusted organized religion. The Fouriers' Phalanx newspaper argued Christian preachers tried to uphold a theoretical virtue while ignoring the depraving influences that induced individuals to turn away from the Christian path. The author explained, "The truth of Christianity has not yet acted upon false human societies and transformed them, establishing the reign of justice and peace and harmony in the place of the reign of discord and evil." The Fouriers argued that they were the ones who would accomplish the social mission of Jesus Christ, the social redemption and elevation of mankind on earth. Fourier taught that all individuals have passional attraction and that philanthropically minded people must shape society to be in harmony with such attractions. He believed society must nurture these innate passions in order to make labor attractive. Attractive labor would smooth over the contradictions in society and achieve universal harmony. Passional attraction was akin to God's Holy Spirit. If humanity was to be in harmony with God's plan, they had to base society around passional law. Albert Brisbane believed that once society reached its harmonic stage, the divinity of everyday life would replace the old religions. Massachusetts radicals associated with the transcendentalist utopian community at Brook Farm went as far as to create their own church devoted to Fourier's teaching, called the Religious Union of Associationists in 1847. It became known as the Church of Humanity under the leadership of Unitarian minister William Henry Channing. The group taught a syncretic blend of biblical Christianity and Fourier's philosophy. They even put on elaborate rituals venerating both Jesus Christ and Charles Fourier as saints. However, by 1847, Channing and many other religious Brook Farmers largely converted to a liberal reading of Swedenborgianism. Perhaps coincidentally, spiritualist medium Andrew Jackson Davis, the so-called Poughkeepsie seer, reported he had met Emanuel Swedenborg's ghost in 1844. The ghost told him to reach out to Brook Farm in order to help with their Christian efforts. By 1847, Davis was one of the key spiritual leaders at Brook Farm. A writer for the perfectionist Oneida Circular explained, Swedenborgianism went deeper into the hearts of the people than the socialism that introduced it because it was a religion. The Bible and revivals had made men hungry for something more than social reconstruction. Swedenborg's offer of a new heaven as well as a new earth met the demand magnificently. The Swedenborgians had been welcoming to utopians since Robert Owen convinced the Swedenborgians of Cincinnati, Ohio, to form the Yellow Springs community with him in 1824. Swedenborgians participated in other Owenite communities as well. A New Church journalist reported that Swedenborgians were involved in nearly every Fourier's family. John Humphrey Noyes reported, it is not too much to say that their Fourierism, if it had lived, would have had Swedenborgianism for its state religion. Homeopathic practitioner Charles Julius Hempel wrote of Fourier and Swedenborg in 1848, the doctrines of these two great men cannot remain separate. Their union constitutes the union of science and religion. However, in their treatises of the public, the Fouriers expressed no interest in an official church. They presented their creed as both dramatically ecumenical and the true fulfillment of Christ's prophecies. Brisbane promised under a harmonian order, the most perfect freedom of opinion will exist, and a true sentiment of tolerance be inculcated. Every individual will enjoy his religious opinions precisely as he wishes and without restriction. The association will build a church, and if there are persons who entertain particular religious views, the association will furnish them halls where they can render thanks to the creator of the universe as they feel and judge proper. The Fourier's Clarkson phalanx was particularly successful in applying Brisbane's principles of ecumenical association. Members were of a range of different religions. A member of each religion was on the gospel committee, which oversaw religious services. Clarkson phalangist John Gregg explained, as for religion, we had 74 praying Christians, including all the sects in America, excepting Millerites and Mormons. We had one Catholic family, Dr. Edwin Arthur Thellers, one Presbyterian clergyman, and one Universalist. One of our first trustees was a Quaker, one atheist, several deists, and, in short, a general assortment. But of nothingarians, none. For being the first time in our lives, we spoke out, one and all, and found that everybody did believe something. The Fourier's fascination with Swedenborg led to a general embrace of spiritualism on the American left. British author Arthur Conan Doyle wrote of Swedenborg, in spite of all his theological symbolism, his name must live eternally as the first of all modern men who has given a description of the process of death and of the world beyond, which is not founded upon the vague, ecstatic, and impossible visions of the old churches, but which actually corresponds with the descriptions which we ourselves obtain from those who endeavor to convey back to us some clear idea of their new existence. Conan Doyle disagreed with some of Swedenborg's assumptions, however he acknowledged his laying the foundation for spiritualism. According to Conan Doyle, the Shakers were the link between Swedenborgianism, socialism, and spiritualism. Conan Doyle described the Shakers' practice of receiving visionary gifts. Native American spirits were frequent spiritual visitors to the Shakers. A participant at one of those events explained, one or two elders might be in the room below, and there would be a knock at the door, and the Indians would ask whether they might come in. Permission being given, a whole tribe of Indian spirits would troop into the house, and in a few minutes you would hear whoop and here and whoop there and all over the house. Lewis Henry Morgan also made frequent appearances in Shaker gift trances. Conan Doyle concluded, this episode of the Shaker manifestations is a very distinct link between the Swedenborg pioneer work and the period of Andrew Jackson Davis and the Fox sisters. The Scottish clergyman and founder of the Catholic Apostolic Church, a mystic movement, Edward Irving, himself known for visions and speaking in tongues, became another link between socialism and spiritualism. Irving became interested in Robert Owen's socialist communities in the 1820s. Conan Doyle wrote, Irving and the stalwarts who were loyal to him wandered forth in search of new premises and found them in the hall used by Robert Owen, the socialist, philanthropist, and free thinker, who was destined 20 years later to be one of the pioneer converts to spiritualism. By 1854, formerly atheist Owen even converted to spiritualism after holding sessions with American medium Maria B. Hayden. Owen claimed to have met with the ghosts of Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson in order to enlist their help to supplant the present false, disunited, and miserable state of human existence for a true, united, and happy state, to prepare the world for universal peace, and to infuse into all the spirit of charity, forbearance, and love. Owen believed spiritualism held the power to unlock human potential, so people would naturally begin to establish the kind of socialist utopia he had envisioned. Owen's son Robert Dale, raised atheist, also converted to spiritualism around the same time. Robert Dale Owen wrote 2 books on spiritualism, Footfalls on the Boundary of Another World in 1859 and The Debatable Land Between This World and the Next in 1872. The Owens had scientific, skeptical ways of seeing the world. Their inquiries into spiritualism apparently satisfied their conditions for revision of previous views based on new evidence. While spiritualism was coming into vogue in the 1850s, another religion with origins in Western New York was also growing. The angel Moroni visited the prophet Joseph Smith in Palmyra in 1823. The introduction to the Book of Mormon states on September 21st, 1823, the same Moroni, then a glorified, resurrected being, appeared to the prophet Joseph Smith and instructed him relative to the ancient record and its destined translation into the English language. Throughout that decade, Smith claimed to have frequent visitation with angels who inspired him to pen the Book of Mormon. Between 1830 and 1844, angry mobs ran Smith's followers out of Palmyra, New York, Kirkland, Ohio, Jackson County, Missouri, and finally Nauvoo, Iowa, where a mob killed Smith. They were hated for their radical theology and polygamous marriage relations. Today, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has their headquarters in Salt Lake City, Utah. However, they still own the historic site in Palmyra where Joseph Smith first received the revelations that led to the creation of the church. The Second Great Awakening was a key subjective condition that allowed Western New York to transform from the burnt-over district of revivalism to the volcanic district of utopian socialism. After the 1840s, Western New Yorkers once again looked to religion to do what secular institutions had thus far been unable to do, create a better world. And in 1848, the Fox sisters inspired a national sensation that looked to spiritualism for answers. To get to the Fox sisters in just a minute, but before we do, I would like to read from Robert Dale Owen's Footfalls on the Boundary of Another World. The book was published in 1860, and the author was Robert Dale Owen, the son of Robert Owen. Robert Owen, known to be one of the fathers of secular utopian socialism, of course, the founder of New Harmony, Indiana, and several other communities throughout these states. So here's from Robert Dale Owen's preface to Footfalls on the Boundary of Another World. It may interest the reader, before perusing this volume, to know some of the circumstances which preceded and produced it. The subjects of which it treats came originally under my notice in a land where, except to the privileged foreigner, such subjects are interdicted, at Naples in the autumn of 1855. Up to that period, I had regarded the whole as a delusion, which no prejudice indeed would have prevented my examining with care, but in which, lacking such examination, I had no faith whatsoever. To an excellent friend and former colleague, the Viscount de Saint Amaro, Brazilian minister at Naples, I shall ever remain debtor for having first won my serious attention to phenomenon of a magneto-psychological character and to the study of analogous subjects. It was in his apartments on the 4th of March, 1856, in the presence of himself and his lady, together with a member of the royal family of Naples, that I witnessed for the first time, with mingled feelings of surprise and incredulity, certain physical movements, apparently without material agency. 3 weeks later, during an evening at the Russian minister's, an incident occurred, as we say, fortuitously, which after the strictest scrutiny, I found myself unable to explain without referring it to some intelligent agency foreign to the spectators present, not one of whom, it may be added, knew or had practiced anything connected with what is called spiritualism or mediumship. From that day, I determined to test the matter thoroughly. My public duties left me in winter few leisure hours, but many during the summer and autumn months, and that leisure, throughout more than 2 years, I devoted to an investigation, conducted partly by personal observations made in domestic privacy, partly by means of books, of the great question whether agencies from another phase of existence ever intervene here and operate for good or evil on mankind. For a time, the observations I made were similar to those which during the last 10 years so many thousands have instituted in our country and in Europe, and my reading was restricted to works for and against animal magnetism and for and against the modern spiritual theory. But as the field opened before me, I found it expedient to enlarge my sphere of research, to consult the best professional works on physiology, especially in its connection with mental phenomena, on psychology in general, on sleep, on hallucination, on insanity, on the great mental epidemics of Europe and America, together with treatises on the imponderables, including Reichenbach's curious observations and the records of interesting researches recently made in Prussia and Italy and England and elsewhere on the subject of human electricity in connection with its influence on the nervous system and muscular tissues. I collected, too, the most noted old works containing narrative collections of apparitions, haunting, presentments, and the like, accompanied by dissertations on the invisible world, and toiled through formidable piles of chaff to reach a few gleanings of sound grain. Gradually, I became convinced that what by many have been regarded as new and unexampled phenomena are but modern phases of what has ever existed. And I ultimately reached the conclusion that in order to a proper understanding of much that has excited and perplexed the public mind under the name of spiritual manifestations, historical research should precede every other inquiry, that we ought to look throughout the past for classes of phenomena and seek to arrange these each in its proper niche. I was finally satisfied also that it behooved the student in this field, in the first instance at least, to devote his attention to spontaneous phenomena, rather than to those that are evoked, to appearances and disturbances that present themselves occasionally only, it is true, but neither sought nor looked for, like the rainbow or the aurora borealis, or the wind that bloweth where it listeth, uncontrolled by the witches or the agency of man. By restricting the inquiry to these, all suspicion of being misled by epidemic excitement or expectant attention is completely set aside. A record of such phenomena, carefully selected and authenticated, constitutes the staple of the present volume. In putting it forth, I am not to be held any more than is the naturalist or the astronomer to the imputation of tampering with holy things. As regards the special purpose of this work, no charge of necromantic efforts or unlawful seeking need be met, since it cannot possibly apply. The accusation, if any be brought, will be of a different character. If suspicion I incur, it will be not of sorcery, but of superstition, of an endeavor perhaps to revive popular delusions, which the lights of modern science have long since dispelled, or of stooping to put forth as grave relations of fact what are no better than idle nursery tales. Accepting this issue, I am content to put myself on the country. I demand a fair trial before a jury who have not prejudged the cause. I ask for my witnesses a patient hearing, well assured that the final verdict, be as it may, will be in accordance with reason and justice. I aspire not to build up a theory. I doubt as to this subject whether any man living is yet prepared to do so. My less ambitious endeavor is to collect together solid, reliable building stones which may serve some future architect. Already beyond middle age, it is not likely that I shall continue here long enough to see the edifice erected, but others may. The race endures, though the individual passes to another stage of existence. If I did not esteem my subject one of vast importance, I should be unworthy to approach its treatment. Had I found other writers bestowing upon it the attention which that importance merits, I should have remained silent. As it is, I have felt with a modern author that the withholding of large truths from the world may be a betrayal of the greatest trust. I am conscious, on the other hand, that one is ever apt to overestimate the importance of one's own labors. Yet even an effort such as this may suffice to give public opinion a true or false direction. Great results are sometimes determined by humble agencies. A ridge tile of a cottage in Derbyshire, says Gisborne, decides whether the rain which falls from heaven shall be directed to the German Ocean or the Atlantic. Let the reader, before he enters on the inquiry whether ultramundane interference be a great reality or a portentous delusion, permit me one additional remark. He will find that in treating that hypothesis, I have left many things obscure and uninterpreted. Where no theory was clearly indicated, I preferred to state the facts and waive all explanation, having reached that period of life when, if good use has been made of past years, one is not ashamed to say, I do not know, in any case in which that is the simple truth. We do well, however, to bear in mind that a difficulty unsolved does not amount to an argument in opposition.
Spiritualism began in upstate New York with stories about miracles that took place in the presence of two young girls. Within a couple of years, the events in Hyattville would blossom into an international religious movement. Katie and Margaret Fox, ages 11 and 15, had just moved into a small house with their parents who were poor farmers. This little farmhouse was later subjected to intense scrutiny because every night, just as the girls were going to bed, strange rapping noises were heard. There seemed to be no explanation for these aggravating noises. The parents checked the cellar, the casings of the windows, and the doors, but failed to find the source. The girls said the only possible explanation was that the raps came from a ghost. They nicknamed him Mr. Splitfoot. On Friday night, March 31, 1848, we concluded to go to bed early and not permit ourselves to be disturbed by the noises. My husband and I had just lain down. It commenced as usual. My youngest child, Katie, said, "Mr. Splitfoot, do as I do," clapping her hands. I heard two sounds as soon as the words were spoken. With those two raps, responding to a young girl's request, a religion was born. Word spread quickly that a ghostly spirit was communicating by rapping. It couldn't be seen, perhaps, but it could see and hear and answer questions. Skeptics wondered why the rappings in the farmhouse could be heard only when the Fox girls were present. The telegraph had been demonstrated for the first time only 4 years earlier, and some people theorized that the girls somehow functioned like telegraph wires, as channels or mediums, conducting mysterious energies from a faraway world. Two of the earliest believers were Amy and Isaac Post, open-minded Quakers who were friends of the Fox family. The Posts were active in the anti-slavery and women's rights movements, and they counted among their acquaintances such national leaders as Abigail Kelly, William Lloyd Garrison, and Frederick Douglass. These political radicals became the Fox sisters' first public audiences at Amy and Isaac Post's house. Some asked the spirits questions, hoping for spiritual sanction for their political beliefs. Is there equality for the races after death? Should women and blacks have the vote? The answers to these questions, supposedly given by the spirits through the girls, was yes.
For people who believed that authority was oppressive, the authority of masters over slaves, the authority of husbands over wives, of men over women, of the clergy over their parishioners, people who believed that these forms of authority were oppressive were drawn to this religion because it argued that individuals could have direct access to divine knowledge.
So you heard a clip from the 1994 PBS-produced American Experience documentary, Telegrams from the Dead, and now we'll talk about the Fox.
Including spinning tables, gifts from heaven, materialized spirit forms, levitations, and messages from the dead.
According to legend, on March 31st, 1848, two sisters, Kate and Margaretta Fox, decided to respond to the mysterious rappings that had kept the family awake at night. The rappings were thought to be construction going on down the road, but 15-year-old Margaretta and 11-year-old Kate decided to try and communicate with them. They said, "Do as I do," and clapped 3 times. The rappings rapped 3 times. The event is said to be the birth of the modern spiritualist movement. Kate and Margaretta later claimed they were communicating with a peddler named Charles B. Rosna, who told them he had been murdered in the home. According to the sisters, Rosna told them he had been murdered by the man who owned the home previous to the Foxes for being overly friendly with his wife. News of the sisters' abilities reached Amy and Isaac Post, radical Quixite Hakers in Rochester, New York, who would become the Fox sisters' link to Fourierism. Amy and Isaac Post were good friends in the Society of Friends, the Hicksite Society, with fellow Quakers Asa and Huldah Anthony and Benjamin and Sarah Fish. The Anthonys and the Fishes were members of the Sodus Bay Phalanx, a Fourierist phalanx near the area on Lake Ontario. Amy and Isaac Post called on the Fox sisters to move to Rochester and promised to support their careers as itinerant mediums. Kate and Margaretta moved in with their sister Leah in Rochester, who soon became their business manager. They first demonstrated the wrappings in Rochester Corinthian Hall on November 14, 1849. They soon caught the attention of radical newspaper magnate and Congress Horace Greeley, another link to Fourier, right? Greeley had been involved in the North American Phalanx and many other Fourierist phalanxes. Farm, he was a harbinger, and had turned the New York Tribune newspapers, the newspaper that he owned and edited, had turned it into an organ of Fourierist agitation for a time in the 1840s. Of course, we know later kind of changed his views on a lot of things, and by 1872 was one of the founders of the Liberal Republican Party who was against the radical Republican program construction. So a little context on Greeley there. But Greeley had been interested in a variety of religious and reform movements, from Fourierism to Universalism. Greeley introduced the sisters to the New York socialized scene, where they developed a taste for wine and brandy. The sisters eventually would struggle with alcoholism. From there, the spiritualist movement grew and became a national sensation. The Fox sisters and their imitators held seances in most major cities. In 1888, the sisters ultimately rejected spiritualism. Margaretta wrote in an 1888 letter to Greeley's newspaper, the New York Tribune, that I have been chiefly instrumental in perpetuating the fraud of spiritualism upon a too confiding public. Most of you doubtless know. The greatest sorrow in my life has been that this is true, and though it has come late in my day, I am now prepared to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God. I am here tonight as one of the founders of spiritualism to denounce it as an absolute falsehood from beginning to end, as the flimsiest of superstitions, the most wicked blasphemy known to the magician Harry Houdini took an interest in the Fox sisters' skills. Margaretta told him, when we went to bed at night, we used to tie an apple to a string and move the string up and down, causing the apple to bump on the floor. Or we would drop the apple on the floor, making a strange noise every time it rebounded. Mother listened to this for a time. She would not understand it and did not suspect us of being capable of a trick because we were so young. As for the peddler who accused the homeowner of his murder, Margaretta told Houdini, they, the neighbors, were convinced that someone had been murdered in the house. They asked the spirits through us about it, and we would rap one for the spirit answer yes, no, not three, as we did afterward. The murder, they concluded, must have been committed in the house. They went over the whole surrounding country trying to get the names of people who had formerly lived in the house. Finally, they found a man by the name of Bell, and they said that this poor innocent man had committed a murder in the house and that the noises had come from the spirit of the murdered person. Poor Bell was shunned and looked upon by the whole community as a murderer. Kate, too, wrote in the New York Herald, I regard spiritualism as one of the greatest curses that the world has ever known. I asked a member of the Spiritualist Church and taker of the Hydesville Fox Sisters cabin property why she believed Margaretta would recant. She explained that interest in spiritualism had waned by the 1880s, and Margaretta found it difficult to maintain her financial well-being along with her alcohol habit. Houdini promised her a great deal of money to help him with his book, A Magician Among the Spirits. Tracy, the member of the Spiritualist Church, argued that Margaretta was clearly materially motivated to collaborate with Houdini. In 1904, after both the sisters had passed away, the Fox's Hydesville home was moved to the Spiritualist community at Lilydale, New York. The peddler's bones were indeed found in a part of the wall that looked like it had been built for the purpose of hiding a body. Despite Margaretta's recantation, at least one of the sisters' claims was indeed vindicated.
The devil inside. Give me some chocolate or I'll skin your eye. You're gonna be scared cause I'm the one who decides. You better run, you better hide. Buy a ticket, take the ride. You better run, you better hide. Cause you're free off with me and off with you. School is bounce of me and I steal like blue. Better get a priest to exercise. You better come up with a good disguise. Go buy a mask at the Halloween store. Make it a creepy one with the blood and gore.
A case was found. Mrs. Lincoln and other spiritualists continued to cherish their spirit workers. The civil war with all its death and calamity
In Robert Owen Sr.'s spiritualist treatise, The Future of the Human Race, or Great, Glorious, and Future Revolution, to be effected through the agency of departed spirits of good and superior men and women, Owen listed newly discovered facts that he believed would alter the course of human history for the better. That the disclosure to men of the means of direct immediate communication with spirits of departed goods and superior men has opened the means to society by which the invisible material conditions in which to place all born of man may be greatly improved. That now, by combining these new and improved, grosser, visible, and more refined, invisible material conditions all around from birth, a new state of human existence may be speedily made to arise, which shall delight the hearts of all by immensely improving the permanent conditions of everyone, from the youngest to the oldest, from the lowest to the highest, and which shall, to the illimitable extent, improve the organizations born to man through each succeeding generation. Lilydale was built as a beacon for spiritual energy that will collect and flow from Lake Cassadaga out to the world. Robert Owen believed this mission was in line with his socialist ideas. The first rumblings of mesmerism came the same year as the explosion of Fourierism in western New York. In 1844, a man known only as Dr. Moran came from Vermont to Leona, New York, to demonstrate the practice of mesmerism. Mesmerism, discovered by 17th century Dr. Franz Anton Mesmer, was the belief in a transference of energy or animal magnetism between all living things. Mesmerists believed they could manipulate the animal magnetic field to move objects, heal, and have other effects on humans, animals, and plants. William Johnson, the son of Leona's Methodist minister, attended Mr. Moran's demonstration and learned enough to heal Jeremiah Carter, who was not at the demonstration, of his consumption. Carter learned from Johnson how to enter a trance through a mesmeric state. Others throughout the town discovered they had trance-inducing powers. The town welcomed outsiders to weekly spirit communication demonstrations. They formed the Religious Society of Free Thinkers, a spiritualist society, in 1855. In 1879, spiritualists formed the Cassadaga Lake Free Association, a camp meeting to gather spiritualists from around the world for the practice and demonstration of their craft. The residents had annual camp meetings and built permanent dwellings in the area. In 1880, they dedicated their association to free speech, free thought, and free investigation. The community continued to grow through the late 19th and early 20th century. They changed their name to the City of Light in 1903, and then finally to the Lilydale Assembly in 1906.
Things couldn't happen. Instruments played, looked, wonderful. Things that couldn't happen. They were still happening.
The people who have had near-death experiences really don't want to come back. You can fly, you can travel, you're not in pain anymore, you can see anything you want to see. I mean, it's so much more liberating.
First, somebody has to accept the fact that they don't have a physical body, and then they go somewhere and destimulate for a while. Then they have to learn to communicate all over again. Usually it's about a year and a half before someone's able to come through a medium. It depends on the individual. I think somebody that's older or that's been ill for a time and is expecting to die can manage to come back sooner than someone who it's totally unexpected. They go through an accident or a murder or something like that. It takes them longer. And a suicide usually takes the longest because they have so much of their own stuff to work through.
That was a clip from the HBO documentary No One Ever Dies in Lilydale, where you heard a medium talking about her practice of communicating with the dead. Psychics, mediums, tarot readers are all versions of psychotherapy. Psychologist Carl Jung was not afraid to acknowledge this fact. Jung was influenced by spiritualism in his early days. Author F.X. Charest argues in the book Spiritualism and the Foundations of C.G. Jung's Psychology that elements of Jung's psychological theories, such as the concept of psychic energy, were influenced by his early preoccupation with spiritualism. Even if one does not believe in the supernatural, there is still a use of spirit communicators. They can foster a connection to the past, a sense of community, a respect for the law of love, and a new perspective on current situations. Although the foundation still exists in Hydesville, New York, one is not able to see the Fox family's actual cottage where the famous Rochester rapping took place. In 1915, spiritualist devotee B.F. Bartlett purchased the Fox family's cottage in Hydesville. However, he could not purchase the land. Spiritualists took the cottage apart and transported it in parts on the Erie Canal. Lilydale dedicated it as a shrine to spiritualism in 1916. In 1955, it burned down. According to spiritualist
Reverend Arthur Myers. 4 o'clock in the morning, September 21st, 1955. I sit here in my home staring dejectedly into empty. I've just witnessed the end of a cottage. An era is ended. An historical relic important to the whole world has been consumed by outlaw yellow flames. An international shrine leveled in a few short minutes to the category of memory. The Fox Cottage is no more. In the still of a clear, cold night, the ravages of fire reduce romance, history, tradition, and pride into glowing ashes and scattered dust. We can but weep. At 3:30 in the morning, a motorist on the main highway, a mile from Lilydale, saw the glow of fire in the sky. Quickly he drove to the dale, up and down the quick streets, tooting the horn of his car. Lilydale is a quiet place, and at that time the motorist had difficulty rousing the resident. Quickly the fire alarm sounded, and our fire department, along with the fire department of neighboring Casadaga, fought valiantly to save the cottage. But to no avail, for the fire had too strong a hold. Only blackened portions of the front and side walls remain, and a wealth of precious relics and mementos are lost forever. Can it be that we've failed in our duty to spiritualism? Have we been too careless of the precious heritage given to our care? May we find that this dismal tragedy will spur us to greater efforts, greater works to the glory of eternal spirit? Our cottage is gone, the cause, fire of undetermined origin. The forest temple at the Dale began as little more than a clearing and some branches in the woods in 1892. In 1914, spiritualist Benjamin Bartlett had a chapel built. He dedicated the structure to his mother. Today, spiritualists reveal spiritual messages every day at 4 p.m. at the forest temple during the regular camp season, which goes from the last week in June until the end of August. Spiritualist Marion Skidmore began collecting books campgoers brought to Lilydale in the 1880s. She began the library at Lilydale in 1886. Today, the library houses a collection of around 1,300 spiritualist books. Chief Oskenantan of the Mohawk Nation was one of Lilydale's most famous residents. He became famous as a singer and performed concerts around the world in the 1910s and 20s. During the 1930s and 40s, Oskenantan held healing circles in a wigwam at Lilydale.
Take a ride, you better run, you better hide, 'cause you're going with me, and I'll love with you. Spirits bounce off me, and they stick like glue. Better get the priest to exercise. Better come on with a good disguise. Go buy a mask at the hardware store. Make it a creepy one with blood and a gore. Don't wanna see your boiled beautiful face. Wanna see a ghost in the meshes and
The period required to accomplish the entire change which I saw was not far from 2 hours and a half. But this furnished no rule as to the time required for every spirit to elevate and reorganize itself above the head of the outer form. Without changing my position or spiritual perceptions, I continued to observe the movements of her newborn spirit. As soon as she became accustomed to her new elements which surrounded her, she descended from her elevated position, which was immediately over the body, by an effort of willpower, and directly passed out of the door of the bedroom in which she had been laying, in the material form, prostrated with disease for several weeks. It being in the summer month, the doors were all open, and her egress from the house was attended with no obstruction. I saw her pass through the adjoining room, out of the door, and step from the house into the atmosphere. I was overwhelmed with delight and astonishment when, for the first time, I realized the universal truth that the spiritual organization can tread the atmosphere, which is impossible while in the coarser earthly form. So much more refined is man's spiritual constitution. She walked in the atmosphere as easily and in the same manner as we tread the earth and ascend an eminence. Immediately upon her emergence from the house, she was joined by 2 friendly spirits from the spiritual country. And after tenderly recognizing and communing with each other, the 3, in a most graceful manner, began ascending obliquely through the ethereal envelopment of her globe. They walked so naturally and fraternally together that I could scarce realize the fact that they trod the air. They seemed to be walking upon the side of a glorious but familiar mountain. I continued to gaze upon them until the distance shut them from my view, whereupon I returned to my external and ordinary condition. This account of the facts of what actually happened at death is confirmed by numerous other witnesses who agree as to the main details.
Andrew Jackson Davis became one of the most well-known itinerant spiritualists. When he was a boy, Davis claimed to have heard voices in the fields. When his mother died, Davis had a vision of her in heaven. On March 6, 1844, Davis claims to have entered a trance and been transported from Poughkeepsie to the Catskill Mountain. During this incident, the spirit of Manuel Swedenborg guided him back to civilization. Swedenborg told Davis to meet with the Fourierists in Massachusetts. Davis became a socialist. Later on, socialist Albert Brisbane was often one of Jackson's witnesses at his trance demonstrations. Davis spent that last third of the book, Principles of Nature, which he claimed to have written in a trance state, advocating a form of socialism similar to Fourier's formula. Davis recommended the establishment of cooperative communities and collectivized economic planning. Then they must inquire into various modes and plans of organizing and combining labor. How much labor it is proper to bestow upon any given subject, at what time it should be bestowed, and how many can labor profitably to accelerate its accomplishment. Knowing these things and adopting the proper plans of proceeding, they should call to their assistance as many laborers as can properly and profitably be employed. They should not work over 3/4 of a period of sunlight, and the employment of each one must be of such a character as will agree with his constitutional abilities and his desire to be engaged. Davis believed this Fourierist-like system would bring the greatest fulfillment to mankind. Their interest will consist not in the accumulation of needless wealth, but in happiness which each person will enjoy, from being so situated as to render others happy. Not for the purpose of speculating upon community will the association labor, but to ameliorate the condition of the mechanic and the various professions by supplying their wants abundantly and at a price which falls within their resources. Although he did not call it such by name, he praised Fourierism under the name Agricultural Association. In this manner can labor be condensed, made attractive, profitable, and elevating, and this is the rudimental step towards establishing among the tillers of the land a reciprocal movement, and a privilege of assisting themselves and a community to a more congenial and useful existence. This may be called an agricultural association. They will discover that they have the advantage over all individuals of like occupation in society, and that they will be enabled to supply the requirements of a populous village with more ease and profitableness than any dealer, merchant, or speculator. The Lilydale Spiritualist Assembly dedicated the Andrew Jackson Davis Lyceum at Lilydale, located at the Children's Acre, to Davis on July 15, 1928. Today there is a maze, playground, and campground in the area. According to the sign outside, the Lyceum has been used as a Sunday school and a community center. Meetings are still held at the Lyceum during the camp season.
Alright, so we shall finish up this first installment of the Pioneers of American Socialism Halloween special with a reading from Andrew Jackson Davis, his 1847 magnum opus, The Principles of Nature, Her Divine Revelations. Now recall that this book was written a year before the Rochester Rappings, so-called, in Hydesville, actually, New York, that the Fox sisters identified. But Andrew Jackson Davis, in the third section of this book entitled A Voice to Mankind, talks about some concepts that he received from the spirits that sound very similar to those conclusions that Charles Fourier came to. So we'll start here. There is a constitutional mutual affection manifested between every particle and compound in being. This is the law of association, which is the rudimental principle of nature established by God, who is love. This law creates, develops, and perfects man, and distributes the race, together with all created things, to portions of the earth congenial with their respective natures and qualifications. Every form in the vegetable world is distributed by this law of mutual affection. The huge trees are rooted in soil and grow in climates where the delicate flower cannot subsist. A garden cannot exist where the wilderness is, at least until the soil is cultivated and rendered fertile. Neither can the delicate forms in the animal world exist among those that are huge, gigantic, and possessing dissimilar habits. The fish cannot live with the bird, nor the bird with the quadruped. That is, one cannot subsist upon that which sustains the other, but each requires different food, and this distinguishes their individual necessities and habits. So with the human world. They are distributed in various portions of the earth, and in different climates, all surrounding things in nature being adapted to their peculiar conditions and congenial with their physical requirements. The law of association, being the rudimental law of nature and flowing into and uniting all things, is fully developed in the human form. It constitutes men differently, gives them different passions, inclinations, and essences, and properties of soul. It creates the diversity, the multifariousness, manifested in the human world. But although it makes men unlike each other, the variety is necessary to harmonize and unite the whole. The diversity manifests the order of development. It is the mode of perpetual progress, the cause of happiness, and the spring of all life and energy, of all passion and his gratification. Therefore, the diversity is the order of nature, the requirement of man, and the foundation of harmony. Mankind inherit their diversified attributes from the womb of nature, these having been deposited and impregnated by the love and wisdom of God. These attributes constitute the affinity which man sustains to nature, and her provisions to which he is entitled. There is no passion or desire of which nature has not provided means to gratify, especially when such passion or desire is governed by wisdom, by which also its gratification should be regulated. Man is entitled to liberty, plenty, and happiness by nature. She bequeaths these to him and presents her larder stored with bounteous provisions, and invites man to receive, enjoy, and cultivate them, and to be what she intended he should. The inseparable relation between man and nature and the principles of God is established by the law of association. There is no possible way to annul this reciprocal relation or to escape from the obligation to bow in obedience to the laws which govern it. This law of nature is divine because it is the love and life of the deity. It distributes impartial blessings to all, and for every action it dispenses an adequate reward or punishment. There can be no denial of the absoluteness or the connection, and there is no escaping the effects accomplished by the workings of these principles. Man is, then, a child of nature, caressed and guided into all wisdom by her unchangeable possessions. Man is well formed, man is constructed and well distributed on the bosom of nature, and he is a dutiful child, should acknowledge the relation and submit to her wise commands and dispensations. As the law of association thus unites nature and man and establishes diverse and multipotent characteristics in the race, it is upon this indestructible basis that rests the law of reciprocal justice and consequent morality and happiness. Every being, then, is entitled by nature to liberty and happiness, and if everyone does not receive these, injustice is done in some portion of the human world. If the desires of a single being are not gratified, then there is an unjust and isolated absorption in some parts of the great body, which is an injury both to the absorber and to those subject to the absorption. All men have not the same desires and do not need the same gratification. Each one has peculiar wants, and the wants of each one differ in their degrees of development. Hence it follows that happiness should be dispensed by bestowing blessings in proportion to the capabilities of men to appreciate and enjoy them. Those who have superfluous gratifications are as miserable as those whose wants are not adequately supplied. In the one instance, desires become morbid, unhealthy, and corrupting, while in the other, they are impetuous and constantly generating vice, disease, and unhappiness. It is therefore an injury for anyone to have more than he can well employ, appreciate, or make useful, while on the other hand, it is unjust to deprive anyone of that which is necessary to his existence, or any blessing to which he is entitled by nature. To prevent absorption in any part of the great human body, therefore, the wisdom of men must recognize the divine law of association. This law must be applied by making all situations and all degrees of human industry corresponding to its uniform requirements. Hence, then, it is the first item in the remedy for the disease of the social world. Mankind, remember, you must become acquainted with your nature, your creator, and the laws which inseparably unite and harmonize all created things. You must become enlightened and feel the force of this divine truth. And in doing this, you will remove a part of the disease which now corrupts your mental constitution. The law of association, then, establishes harmony and imperatively forbids injustice to anything which it comprehends within its dominion, and this is only limited by the expanse of inconceivable space. Another truth, then, is necessarily evolved and must be acknowledged, and that is that every man is not only entitled to liberty, plenty, justice, and happiness, but he has an important office to fulfill, an end to accomplish, and a destiny to fulfill. Hence, each man must have a distinct position in the great structure of human society, and that position must be determined by his constitutional qualifications and his ability to discharge the obligations it imposes. He must gravitate to his own particular center, and this is determined by the law of association. That is, to whatever soil, climate, occupation, and situation may be most congenial with his natural inclinations as modified and governed by wisdom. Men now occupy situations which they are not capable of filling, and therefore everything they do is injurious to some, beneficial to others, and disgusting to themselves. Being compelled to engage in that which they are not qualified to perform creates discontent in the mind and does injustice to all dependent on their labors. But everyone is entitled to a position determined by the quality and abilities of his constitution. Each man is but an organ of the great human body. In the present condition of things, one organ is opposed to and absorbs the strength and happiness of the other. This generates every species of evil, plain wretchedness, and disorganization. But it is proper that each individual, as an organ of the body, should occupy a position agreeable with the demands of his own nature and the nature of others, and thus distributive and impartial justice would be generated, which would remove the disease, renovate and perfect the body, and promote unity and happiness. Suppose a man to have a disease which affects each organ by obstruction, absorption, and a disturbance of the equilibrium in their forces and essence. Would it not be proper to remove the obstruction, destroy absorption, and equalize the forces and essence so that they might create health? Then, if this is the correct process, is it not equally correct to remove all absorption, obstruction, and want of equilibrium in society, so that every man, like an organ of the body, may perform his appropriate functions and not only be happy himself, but generate happiness for others? One effect of the law of association is known as harmony, and harmony is the soul and element of music. Music is a representation of the divine order, and order is the wisdom of the deity. To establish harmony, therefore, in society, every man must be well instructed and properly situated, so that his movements may accord with the movements of the whole, and thus the movements of the human race will be in concert. Suppose a musical instrument well constructed and capable of giving forth perfect and beautiful melody. Suppose also that the notes it is capable of sounding all accompany it, but are confused. Think you that harmony can proceed from this instrument? Notwithstanding, the notes are all there. If they are not well placed, well timed, or properly concerted, the consequence will be that the most disgusting and frightful discord will proceed from the instrument. So with the human race. The structure is perfect. The notes are all existing, but they are misplaced. And vice, antagonism, and immorality are the consequences. The instrument of society cannot be tuned by an enlightened wisdom. Wisdom may arrange society and place every man in a position congenial with his own nature and the universal requirements of the race. After mankind are so situated, discord cannot arise, but most happy harmony, morality, virtue, and righteousness will prevail. Man has no desires which cannot be gratified. He has no peculiarities but what some position would render agreeable and proper, and these peculiarities must be considered as a musician would consider the notes used in composition of a tune, and wisdom must arrange them in concert so that melody may be fully developed. There is not, nor will there ever be, one being too many. But in order to make man fulfill his destiny, place him in a situation to do it. Make industry attractive, make every dispensation just, and determine every position by specific qualifications. Advance the lower strata of society by pervading them with wisdom and pure influences. Then every man will perform for the use of which he is destined, and all contention that now prevails will be lost in the harmony of the whole. Mankind must be so distributed, and every person must be so situated, as that the position of each may correspond to and harmonize with the divine law, such as is established by God in nature and in man unchangeably. Every individual must gravitate to the position suggested by his nature and its necessities, and also by requirements of others above and below him in the brotherhood. There should be no restriction to individual movements, especially when all movements are determined by wisdom and righteousness of the supreme governor and director of human society. Every person should be as harmoniously situated as the notes in a well-arranged piece of music, and then all feeling, inclination, judgment, industry, progress, and intellectual attainment completely correspond to the law of uniform development and the combined interests of the whole. No person upon the earth should exist inferiorly situated, because such is not in accordance with the nature and order of divine creations. No faculties should be crushed for the want of mental liberty. No powers of a mechanical, mathematical, or philosophical tendency should be obstructed, for nature prescribes liberty and unrestriction of thought. Hence man should be so situated that all his spiritual qualities and facilities may be uncontrolled and their unfoldings unbounded. That these things may be so, men should occupy these positions only when they are capable of filling and in which they are happy and at home. But at present, some are teachers who are not so capable of teaching as many of their pupils. Some are occupying important offices by a voice of the people, and yet are not so capable of governing as those who are governed are to control themselves. And one truth prominent among all nations and in all ages of the world is that the most useful, pure, benevolent, and intelligent men are those who, receiving a perfect constitution by birth and being naturally situated, have unfolded a teeming intellect such as never proceeds from any institution or any mold of obtaining superficial education. Hence it is clear that all those who are good and perfect and have the most truth are the unsophisticated offspring of nature. Such minds possess all the qualifications of mechanics, philosophers, and philanthropists, and love truth and wisdom for their own sakes only, and not to acquire the character of being learned, and thus be advanced to honor and emolument. It is proper, then, that all should be perfectly arranged and well situated, so that all the movements of men, whether industrial or mental, may accord with their own nature and the interests of the whole society. Men must become acquainted with the law of association and its distributions before they concert as harmonious brotherhood on earth. And after men are well situated so that the whole will correspond to a system of undisturbed harmony, then will be developed the law of order. This order will unite them and will represent the same displayed in the structure of the universe. So we can see from this reading of Andrew Jackson Davis that he was indeed very close to Fourierism, perhaps plagiarizing Charles Fourier or the Americanized translations of Charles Fourier by Albert Brisbane. But you can see why many were attracted to spiritualism after the fall of the Fourierist movement, because those who were speaking the most like Fourierists were spiritualists, such as Andrew Jackson Davis. All right, so we've come to the end here of part 1 of the Halloween special of Pioneers of American Socialism. Thank you for listening. So this edition, we've gotten through the Owens, Robert and his son, Robert Dale Owen, and their interest in spiritualism. We talked a little bit about the Fox sisters and their intersection with Fourierism through Amy and Isaac Post and Horace Greeley. And then finally, Andrew Jackson Davis, who's sort of, I would consider more of a founder of modern spiritualism than the Foxes, but who clearly was very much connected with Fourierism. Next time, we will talk about John O. Waddles, who was a member of the Skinny Atlas community, and later the Prairie, and also the Prairie Home community, which were sort of Owenite communities, and then he took hold of the Claremont Phalanx in Ohio, which is a Fourier's community, and started Excelsior, a spiritualist community that ended in tragedy, but we'll find out about that next time. We'll also talk about Harmonia, the spiritualist community in Michigan, and we will finish up by talking about Victoria Woodhull. We mentioned in the episode where we talked about the American Civil War and her belief in Victoria Woodhull, of course, being the first woman to run for president for the United States, and she was a member of the International Working Men's Movement, Karl Marx. All right, well, stay tuned for our next installment, and I wish you all a happy Samhain season, happy Halloween, Feliz Dia de los Muertos, and solemn All Saints Day and All Souls Day. God bless.